Hey guys, it's Ty with Ty the Dog Guy on the daily, and I'm here with my dog Chocolate Chip, and I want to talk about myths in dominance. Sorry, I know I over enunciated that. Myths in dominance. It's hard to say myths, fast and have people understand what you're saying. It sounds like baseball mitt or something if you go fast. So I want to talk about myths in dominance. And so, like I say, I'm hanging out here with Chocolate Chip, and I've just kind of invited her to be on the bench with me. And it reminds me of, so many things that I've heard over the years of people saying, oh, well, you can't let the dog on the couch. You can't let the dog on the bed. You have to eat before your dog. You have to make sure that your dog moves when you're walking instead of you, like, stepping around your dog. You can't play tug-of-war with your dog. You definitely can't lose tug-of-war to your dog. Things like that. I don't know if you've heard any of these things. And like I say, to a degree, a lot of these things are myths, but not always. All right, so let me explain that, because I know I'm giving kind of two conflicting things here. So, if you're doing the right things with your dog, and when I say the right things, I mean you're establishing the right relationships, you're teaching solid obedience, you're teaching impulse control, teaching all these things that dogs need to have in the first place. If you're doing all of those things, there's a halfway decent chance that you're going to be fine with a dog getting on the bed, getting on the couch, playing tug-of-war, losing in tug-of-war, eating after your dog, things like that. There's a solid chance you can do that. Because it's not necessarily wrong to keep the dog off of the bed. It's not wrong to, to eat before your dog or whatever. But there's so many things that are far more right. And so, like I say, we have what we call a social hierarchy checklist that we give to our clients. And the social hierarchy checklist outlines a number of things to do. Things like, again, keeping the dog off the bed, keeping the dog off the couch, making sure that you walk through the door first, things like that. So those things are absolutely true when they need to be true. And usually when they need to be true is one of two things. We've got, number one, an owner who's not following through on training as well as they should. And so they're not doing the things that are going to promote the right relationship with their dog. And as a result, they need these extra little things to kind of help make sure that they keep the social hierarchy in the right spot. Meaning you, the dog owner, are the leader, and the dog is a happy follower. That type of thing, right? So that's number one. Number two, some folks need this social hierarchy checklist because their dog is very, very dominant. Some dogs by nature, some people by nature, some cats by nature, some ducks by nature, whatever, are more dominant or more willing to push, because dominant's kind of a buzzword, right? Dominant is kind of overused, but I would define it as willing to push, willing to get their way. Whereas a lot of, living creatures in a social type setting don't want to upset the balance, right? They don't want to be pushy because that upsets the balance, and now people aren't too thrilled with them. And so a lot of dogs have that too. They don't want to be too pushy because they realize what that means. That when I'm too pushy, things get a little bit out of whack. But there are some dogs, like I said, that we can classify as dominant and, just willing to push and do whatever it is to get their way. And that is a dog that needs kind of these social hierarchy little checklists. Like I say, stay off the couch, make sure the dog's walking properly and not pulling, make sure that, the dog's not getting on the bed, make sure the dog's waiting at doors, not jumping on you, things like that. But like I say, for the average dog, if the owner, because the whole purpose of these myths, or why these myths have been spread, which, like I say, aren't always myths, but the whole purpose of why they've been spread is the idea of, like, hey, we need to be the leader of our dog. And that's a solid idea, right? We really should. Our dogs live in this domesticated world that we've created for them. They don't know how to navigate it. They don't know what stoves and cars and doors, they don't know what those things are. They can learn a lot about it, sure, but, this is not their world. And so it's important that they have a leader that, kind of deciphers things for them. And so, like I say, that's where these kind of dominance myths come from, is, hey, I need to be the leader. So in order to do that, I'm going to make sure the dog moves when I'm walking past. I'm going to make sure that dog's not on the couch, things like that. But the reality is Back when I said that those things aren't necessarily wrong, it just so happens that there's a lot of things that are more right. The reality is the more right things is obedience, structure, rules, very clear expectations. That's a big one. Almost everyone has expectations for their dog, but they haven't made those clear. And that's really the way that we get solid leadership with our dogs, is to create expectations and make them very, very clear to our dogs. And when we do that, we do a good job at leadership. And that's the hard part. How do you make expectations clear? Well, that's why I have a job, because it's not so easy to just make it clear that come means come, and don't be aggressive means don't be aggressive, and sit means sit, and all that good stuff, right? And so in any case, can you play tug with your dog? Can you let the dog on the couch? More than likely, if you're doing everything else right. If you happen to be an owner of one of these dogs that's highly dominant and you're doing everything right, you may need some of these little social hierarchy checklist things to make sure that long term you've got the right relationship with your dog.